Hi, my name is Sarojeni Rengam and I'm with Pesticide Action Network Asia and the Pacific, which is part of a global movement of CSOs and people's movements working towards the reduction and elimination of the risks associated with pesticides and to promote biodiversity-based ecological agriculture and alternatives to pesticides. I would like to thank the organizers the opportunity to share my perspective here. I would like to focus on key points that I want to raise in this short time that I have. The resolution is a good first step to address the issue of pesticides in rice farming in wetlands. It is good that the resolution has focused on protecting biodiversity of the wetlands from the negative impact of pesticides in rice farming. The pesticides applied affect non-target species and upset the ecological balance. We know now that the resurgence of the rice plant hopper that decimated huge tracts of rice fields in Southeast Asia was pesticide induced, and that the pesticides kill off natural enemies, destroying the rice ecosystem and allowing the RPH to flourish, and overall contributing to community food insecurity. Worse, pesticides also destroy the diverse supplementary food crops and the edible wild crops that grow on the periphery of the farms. Aquatic life forms such as crabs, shellfish, and other fish that were important sources of protein and that thrived in rice fields and in streams and ponds are affected, and in some areas have disappeared. The use and impacts of hazardous pesticides on the environment can have severe consequences on the livelihood and the health of peoples and communities. In our experience, the reality of pesticide use is horrifying. Rice farmers and hired agricultural workers spray highly hazardous pesticides without any personal protective clothing and are constantly exposed to spray drift and suffer the health impacts of these pesticides. They also lack knowledge of the dangers of the pesticides used. Most of the pesticide-affected rice farming communities, including agricultural workers, are largely poor and disadvantaged, exposed to the worst pesticides and suffer the worst adverse effects. Where there is poverty, there is often malnutrition, which can worsen the effects of pesticides. Chronic effects seriously also threaten rural communities' long-term survival. Endocrine disruption, which is another emerging impact that has only recently been discussed and tested. Research has been going on in terms of its impact. This endocrine disruption can particularly affect unborn babies, causing systemic and functional deficiencies like lowered IQ, susceptibility to disease, behavioral problems, and effects on future fertility. These impacts on children seriously threaten the future of whole communities and could mire communities in more social and economic disintegration, greater poverty, and suffering. Behind the poisoning statistics and effects is the human tragedy of women, men, girls, and boys suffering irreversible intergenerational impacts of pesticides. Exposure of parents to certain highly hazardous pesticides, such as endosulfan, can result in children being born with physical and mental impairments, as has happened in Kasaragod, India. Exposure to pesticides, notably endocrine disruptors, can cause ill effects that can be passed down through many subsequent generations. This has been demonstrated in laboratory studies. These marginalized communities also lack influence over policy and decision makers and lack access to justice when harm occurs. There's less ability to take action, for example, to seek treatment for health effects or switch to safer methods. So this emphasis in the resolution is important in the issue of pesticide risk reduction, and we urge that the implementation of the resolution will keep this as a priority. We would also like to support the implementation of IPM in the resolution, particularly farmer field schools, spearheaded by FAO, which are now, of course, being practiced and implemented by many other agencies, CSOs, and in other institutions. And these are, and IPM farmer field schools are key to build capacity of farmers to understand the rice ecosystem and understand the impacts of pesticides, on not only the environment but also human health. The FFS was an important contributing factor in the effective control of the RPH in Indonesia, together with the ban of the 57 brands of pesticides. But in the long run, the FFS provided the capacity to grow healthy crops, promoted pesticide reduction, and contributed to food security as a whole. For PAN-APF, the FFS approach was essential in farmers' empowerment in order that farmers are able to make decisions in the fields. While saying this, we are also concerned that there are certain so-called IPM labeled programs that do not have this empowerment process, but are essentially workshops to promote pesticides or may be used for genetically modified organisms and their promotion. We also know that the data from the US Department of Agriculture on the adoption of G herbicide-tolerant crops show that G crops are responsible for a huge increase in the use of herbicides. And therefore, we feel strongly that GE should not be part of any IPM program. Finally, PAN believes that the solutions to minimize and eventually eliminate the adverse effects of highly hazardous pesticides in agriculture already exist and are successfully implemented throughout the world. PAN has documented real examples taken from ongoing sustainable farms feeding healthy communities and vulnerable populations from different regions of the world. These biodiversity-based ecological agricultural models exist. For example, in Asia and the Pacific, there are 20,000 rice farmers who do low-input sustainable agriculture in Tamil Nadu. 56,000 rice farmers practice non-chemical SRI in Cambodia, and there are around 35,000 biodiversity-based ecological rice farmers using Masipak approach in the Philippines. In conclusion, I would like to quote from the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Olivier de Schutter, who identified agroecology as a mode of agricultural development which not only shows strong conceptual connections with the right to food, but has proven results for fast progress in the concretization of this human right for many vulnerable groups in various countries and environments. So I'll end here by saying thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing the resolution as soon as possible. Thank you very much.